Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Quarterly Care Managers Conference. We're very, very pleased to see how many people are joining and understand that there was an issue with our SLMS system, so we're glad that people were able to access the link to get onto the training. So we apologize for that and are definitely working to resolve it, so hopefully this doesn't happen again. Okay, so this is Amanda Harper, the Assistant Statewide Care Manager Coordinator. I'll be your host for today. The conference does run from 9:30 to 12:30. The materials were shared through our advisory, but I also understand in the perfect combination of calamities that people did not all receive that. So we will also look into that, and you'll see that there's a file transfer that popped up when you logged on to the WebEx, and through there you can get the advisory 2519 that does have the materials for today's conference included. So if you happen to close that box, if you have the box open, then you just select the button to download, and then you'll have the materials. If you close that box, you can just go up to your left-hand corner to File and File Transfer, and you'll be able to pull it from there. So hopefully that helps. I know people like to follow along with the materials. These materials will also be made available through the advisory on our website at the link on the slide here. So that you'll have these. And also, we are recording today's conference. So if there's pieces that people have missed because they were trying to log on or weren't able to attend, or that you would like to go back and review again, that will be available to you on our website. And we'll review that link a little bit later in the presentation so that you go that is not familiar. And if everyone can that they mute the line, we're getting a little bit of feedback, which can happen sometimes when people call in from a cell phone. So if anybody has done that, sometimes that does mess with our sound. So please just make sure that you're muted. Thanks so much. Okay, so here's the agenda for today's conference. We will be kicking off with some CCO and care manager achievements to start out and set the tone for today. And then we will get into our usual OPWDD hot topics. We're going to have a presentation on tips for CCO care managers to foster communication and collaboration with the care planning team. So it's a mouthful and it's a lot of great information. Then we'll have the review of the life plan dispute resolution process, which is a review from some previously shared information, because we really want to make sure that we delve into this topic and answer continued questions on this and clarify the information that we've shared. And then we'll have a guardianship and medical decision-making presentation. So at the end of each of these topics, we will pause to answer questions as time allows. If there are questions that you have that we were not able to get to today, please make sure that you're following up with your supervisor and CCO leadership to get clarification. I just want to note we've had really, really good attendance on these WebExes over the year, and it's great to see. It's good to see that with everything people have going on, that you're prioritizing attending and getting this information and being engaged. So thank you very much for taking the time. We just want to recognize that we know that on the line we have brand new care managers, we have leadership, we have DDRO leadership, that it's really a mixed population. So we're trying to best address our priority information that we think is going to support your job function, and we know that there is jargons and acronyms and different things that come up that you might not be familiar with. So if there are things, if you are new to this field, new to being a care manager, and there's things that come up that aren't familiar to you, please jot it down, go back to your supervisor, your leadership, and get some clarity on it, that we do really cover a breadth of information across policy and resources and things of that nature. So please, if you have questions, follow up on them. Okay, and also at the conclusion of the conference, on that note, we are going to have a survey, so please take the time to give us a little bit of feedback on what we covered today, on questions you have, and on other topics, so we can continue to provide what we think can help you in your job role and to make it relevant and interesting for you. All right, so without further ado, we are going to start with our celebratory CCO and care manager achievements. We have Alison McCarthy with us this morning to start and to really review as we end 2019, the first year and a half of what the CCO workforce has been able to achieve. So welcome and good morning, Alison.
Good morning, Amanda. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, care managers, supervisors, and CCOs. We want to take the opportunity to thank you for participating, but we also really want to take the opportunity to thank you for all the incredibly hard work over the last 18 months. I think we all recognize that CCO implementation did not occur between the date of June 31, 2018 and July 1, 2018. Implementation has been a process. It's been at least an 18-month process and will continue beyond January 1, 2020. We recognize that as, that switch flipped, it really was just the beginning of getting started with our transformation and our transition to CCO health home care management. So we wanted to take the opportunity to thank you for your dedication, hard work on all levels of the organization, from the leadership to the supervisors to the care managers. It is you who have made this transition. You have partnered with OPWDD. You have partnered with providers, individuals, families to dedicate your time and energy to make this work. So let's just take a look at some of the incredible accomplishments that we've been able to achieve as a community. So if we think about where we were just a year ago, we really did not have a significant number of life plans completed. OPWD at that time and CCOs recognized we had, an information technology challenge. We did not give ourselves the opportunity to really learn and pilot our IT systems, so we had to take a step back, hire a consultant to come in and work with CCOs to overcome obstacles of information technology and the use of the care management system. Today, we are at the point where we have almost 100% completed life plans. We are at, as of November 1st, 91% of completed life plans, and we are very optimistic that we will be very close to 100% at the end of this calendar year. So a significant accomplishment. And again, it's your hard work and dedication that has gotten us there. Next slide. So this is just another look at the completion of life plans. You'll see that upward trend that really has gotten us to the point where we are at the 90% mark and approaching 100%. And again, we have just another trend analysis to show that the steady climb of life plans over time has been rising, and we're at the point now where we can really take the next step in looking at not only the completion and how we achieve a standard life plan that allows us to begin to look at the systemic and the data elements that go along with one care coordination information technology system. So we will then be able to look at that information on a systemic system-wide approach and really be able to use that as we continue to look towards the future. So just a few more accomplishments. The IAM obviously is being used by all CCOs, and we've had a steady climb of the IAM assessment tool, which is that first step at looking at the individual and their comprehensive need. And we, again, on that have achieved close to 100%, so that's great positive news. Just to take a step back, we have a total of 106,000 individuals who are enrolled in CCOs. The majority of those individuals are receiving health home care management. We do have about 3,000 individuals who are enrolled in our basic plan support option. Since inception, we have almost 10,000 new individuals, so it definitely points to, the ability to offer individuals who were not being served through care management an opportunity to begin to have their care coordinated and really bring individuals into the system of care to support their needs. So that's, an important accomplishment, and I think it's a testament to CCOs and their ability to, find individuals who need to be supported. So again, very important achievements that I think we just want to acknowledge as a community and as OPWD, a testament to you and your hard work. So if we look at the next slide, we really look at a little cartoon of starting and really identifying a set of challenges. And it's a testament, again, to CCOs, care managers, and care manager supervisors to our ability to troubleshoot and problem solve. Back in, I think it was March of 2019, we conducted a workshop where we sat down with CCO leadership and we said, okay, we know we have a lot to achieve here. We want to talk about standard operating procedures and tools to provide to care managers, supervisors, and care managers that can really help our staff and our workforce complete and do their job in a way that gives them the tools to move forward and achieve all the accomplishments that I just mentioned. So we will continue to have challenges, but I think what we know is each challenge and each solution that we move forward and resolve is a success. So we want to recognize the continued successes of you as a workforce and of the community, and we will continue to move that forward as we take a step into 2020. So now I just want to take a minute to talk about what's next. We have improved tremendously over the last year. We want to continue to improve. Our continuous quality improvement loop, is what our motto is as a system. We continue to want to figure out solutions and move forward with resolution and then take on the next challenge. So this slide is just a description of that continuous quality improvement loop that we continue to hold close to our objectives and goals to plan, design, discover, check, correct, and then act and improve. So what we're focusing on is improving care manager communication, collaboration, and relationships with individuals and their family members, representatives, and provider staff. So now that we have 100,000 life plans, how do we continue to build the relationships? How do we continue to share information, identify challenges, and resolve those challenges to continue to improve care management for the individuals we serve? We're building additional skills, competencies, and systems to deliver all 6 health home core services with high quality. As you know, we are out visiting each CCO to take a close look at policies and procedures, and also to look at individual client records to say, how are we doing? Where in these reviews can we improve our performance and really focus on the unique individuals and in some cases the behavioral needs of individuals to ensure that we're drilling down beyond just traditional care management, but really taking the health home core services to heart and ensuring that we have the ability to comprehensively care manage and integrate care beyond DD services and across the aisle to medical services, behavioral services, and community integration. So what's next? We have the life plan and person-centered planning process quality improvements within CCOs. So we continue to work with CCOs quality improvement process. Again, I mentioned we have our post-implementation surveys. We are working closely with our data management. Please mute your line if you would. We're getting some feedback. So we have a lot of work within OPWD around our health home core measures and how we're going to take the information technology system that is being shared across all TCOs and really using a consistent data set to begin looking at what we know about care management across the state of New York. How do we take the measures and the data fields that are consistent and talk to stakeholders and engage in a conversation about what it means to have quality in care management. So really an initial step by having the data, we need to look at the data, talk about the data, think about, is it meaningful? Do we need different data fields? And how do we begin to move towards a value-based care system that really can look at information over a statewide system and engage in a conversation across the aisle with stakeholders about improving quality and measuring quality. So again, we're at the beginning. It will be a dialogue and a conversation, but the good news is we have an information technology system that gives us something to begin with. In addition, we have in 2020 a stakeholder work group being launched to look at systemic quality improvement across the CCOs. We have a work group represented by individuals and families, CCOs, providers, OPWD, and other stakeholders to really take a look at some of the challenges that continue to persist. As we look at an individual being enrolled in health home care management, what happens when they enroll? How do we expeditiously complete an assessment, work across the aisle with providers and the care team to achieve a finalized life plan and then an implementable staff action plan? So really taking that process and that loop and saying, what's not working? What information do we need to share? What processes do we need to be putting in place to improve the collaboration and the information sharing and the relationships between ourselves, the individual and family, and the provider to make sure we're serving individuals well. So following the post-implementation review that I mentioned, we will later on in 2020 have a designation process that we'll look at CCOs again at the 3-year mark to really, again, ensure that the improvements continue and that the performance is continuing. So I go back to the continuous quality improvement loop to say OPWD is serious about ensuring that we continue to improve, and OPWD is confident that with the performance and the efforts of care managers, supervisors, and CCOs, we're in a very good position to continue to move down the road of successes and the ability to troubleshoot challenges and the ability to come together collectively to resolve problems and continue to serve people well. So we have a long way to go, but I have no doubt that you are the workforce and CCOs have the interest and the skill set to really take on this challenge and continue to improve what we have established thus far. So again, I want to thank you for your dedication, time, and continued commitment to resolve and move forward and really put the individuals we serve first and coordinate care as we continue to build our ability to integrate and look at a person holistically across all their needs. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Amanda, who is going to introduce our hot topics.
Okay, so to move on to our hot topics, our first item is just a review of an advisory that was sent out and some guidance that we do have on our website. We recognize that there has been a lot of questions regarding the LCED, and there was a advisory that was issued. It's number 7-2019, and it was issued February 26th of 2019, and it's available on the website, and it does go through the process for level of care eligibility determination and what that initial process is with your regional office. And so if people can make sure that they're reviewing this and understanding that process and following it and working closely with your regional office when you are going through the process to obtain that initial level of care. this information goes through the process and also has the documents for the HCBS waiver eligibility available in this advisory as well. So I think it's a helpful document. We also have the link on this slide for the most updated LCED guidance that we have right now. So it is from 2011, and the language is not going to reflect care manager and CCO, but the guidance is still consistent. So if you do have questions, we do encourage for now until there is updated guidance published that you continue to refer to this, that we do have questions and confusion that come in. That comes in through our mailbox and through our regional office that can be answered through this guidance. So just a reminder that these resources are available to make sure that you're following these processes up front. It can save a lot of work on the back end. Our next item is just a review of the early intervention information that's available in our policy manual. So this is for children that are enrolled in early intervention that if you look to our CCO policy manual and guidance in section 11, there is information. It's within the state paid care management information that there is information available about EI and how that process works, that back in the MSC world, people were typically, children that were in EI were typically enrolled in basic plan support, but now you would be working with the regional office to enroll somebody that is receiving waiver services that has the EI service as well, that they would be enrolled in state paid care management. So I encourage you to reference our CCO policy manual, page 111, and see the information that is included there on EI to just make sure that you're taking the proper steps so that somebody is receiving the right supports. And again, making sure you're familiar with this up front so it doesn't create more work later when it's identified that somebody has been enrolled in the wrong thing. So I know that that will likely apply more to intake staff, so making sure that this information does get to them. Our next item is the choices sign-in change. So this is just a reminder on this. There was an advisory that also went out reminding people, but if you've logged on to choices since December 2nd, you will see that that landing page looks different, and you now need to do, for people that are non-OPWDD employees, you do need to add public / in front of your username. So if you missed that with the change and you're now trying to get in and having an issue, this is just a quick reminder on this. And there's information in there as well for OPWDD employees that it was issued in November, the advisory with this information, and it's number 2419. So just a reminder on that for everybody that is using the Choices platform. We're going to have later in the presentation a quick update on the cost of living 2020 updates with Elena DeStefano, so she'll be coming by a little bit later around 11 to present on those slides, and that's just a quick update to make sure you have that information, and then that information will also be posted to our website shortly as a resource. And now I'm going to, in the following slides, go through a couple of the resources that we had that I really appreciated after the September 11th conference. There was some great feedback in the survey from people. And part of that was, it was just wondering, there was questions that could be answered by our resources, and then just some questions about the resources that were out there. You know, we recognize that our website is not always the easiest thing to navigate, and we really put a lot of effort into having things available to you. So this is information that is available currently, and as this changes, we'll share that with you if any of this information is going to be changing. But for right now, we have a few slides that walk you through where you can find some great resources to support you in your care manager role. So our first slide refers to the policy guidance that we have available, and I hope this is a review, so I'm going to go through it quickly, but I will pause at the end to see if there are any questions that are related to, you know, the location and the utilization of these resources. So we have our policy guidance, the policy manual that I've referred to a couple of times, and it's available at this link. It's no longer going to take you to the DOH webpage. That you should always be accessing our policy manual from the OPWDD webpage, where you'll also see policy updates that are important to also review in combination with our policy manual. So the policy manual is an easily searchable document for if there's a question that comes up, to kind of be your first stop to see if it's answered there before going forward to get an answer, to review the language that's been posed there first. There's also a link here for our ADMs, our Administrative Directive Memorandas, and those are a good resource as far as the interpretation of the regulations that you do need to follow within your role. Specific to care management, making sure that you're really familiar with the ADM 2018-06R, which was our transition to People First Care Coordination, that's a great resource, and also the 2018-09R for the Staff Action Plan Program and Billing ADM. You'll also find all of the service-related ADMs within there that are good to be familiar with for the people that you support, for the services that they're receiving, to just make sure that you're familiar with what are the requirements of those services, because they do need to be reflected accurately in the life plan. So it's good to have this link at the ready to try to get familiar with these and to know where to find them. Also, informational resources and material. This is just overall making sure that people know the link to the landing page for care coordination organizations, where you can find, you know, all the information that we've talked about with webinars and the available CCOs and the advisories. That it's kind of the main landing page where you're going to find CCO information. So if we have time, I'll try to scoot over to it just to show you how it looks quickly. So our life plan and staff action plan resources, kind of the main ones to highlight to make sure that you're familiar with. Hopefully people have gone through these, but you know, I know people don't have a lot of free time, especially now with the holidays upon us, but if you have a question, it's really good to go back to these resources, to these PowerPoints, to try to see if things have already been answered. That the staff action plan and service delivery WebEx that we have available, there was 2 that were done last year that were combined and are now available in SLMS. And you can search right here. You can see the OPWDD EL Staff Action Plan to see that training. But there's also a great question and answers document. So I really encourage that people have that available, that it answers a lot of the questions that came up early on about the staff action plan, as far as who needs one, the sections of the staff action plan, of kind of looking at how it marries with the life plan, of section 2 and 3 when frequency and quantity are referred to, how that impacts the staff action plan. That there's a lot of good information in there to make sure that if there's questions that come up from providers, you can use that information, and just to make sure that you're understanding and following that guidance as well. Also, the connecting The DOTS training is a good overview of the life plan and the staff action plan creation and the process of development, and there's another good question and answer with that. So to have those two question and answers on hand are really a good resource and answer a lot of the questions that come up. There's information in the connecting the dots of if there is a dispute, how that can be handled, and other information. So just want to encourage that people have those on hand. And then lastly, we do have one of the information sessions that was done in May, where we had a habilitation specialist who presented on the development of the staff action plan from the life plan, and I feel like she really provided some concrete information as far as how those things can come over from the life plan to be more detailed and developed in the staff action plan. So just encourage that people know where those are and use them if you're in a situation where you need more information. So the training information and resources we have available, I just referenced the webinars, the info sessions that we've done. We were doing them on the 2nd and 4th Wednesday each month. We're now doing them on an as-needed basis as we have presenters and topics that are available. So we do take suggested topics from the CCO training contacts that we have, as well as working with our regional office to see what the trending needs are. So we'll continue to announce future sessions through the advisory, and at this link here are all of the webinars that we've done. So I encourage you to look at those. We have a great one on self-directed services, on employment services. One was just done in October on housing services, so I know that people really wanted more information on that. There was a couple of questions from the last conference, so make sure that you, if you aren't familiar with those, the PowerPoints are available to review, and those recorded sessions are there. And here are the future dates for our next conferences into 2020. We have some noise coming through, so I'm going to wait a minute.
Okay.
Please make sure you're muted. Okay. So into 2020, here are our future dates that will be available through SLMS and shared through the advisory. To make sure that you get those on your calendar. It'll be the same time, 9:30 to 12:30. And we'll also share these dates through the advisory so that they'll be available on the website as well.
Oh.
Okay, so here's some contact lists for you for when you need to reach out with different technical assistance questions or policy questions that you have. We definitely encourage that staff are working internally to, when an issue does come up with somebody that you're working with, that you're, any number of issues that come up, that you're speaking with your care manager supervisor and your care manager leadership to make sure you're following the process that's in place for addressing things, and that a lot of things have been parsed out and answered with the regional office and OPWDD. So we do encourage that you're going through your own chain of command. But when there is an issue that CCO staff needs support with, here are some available contacts at OPWDD. We have the care coordination support liaisons that are available to assist with issues that come up with program and policy, and individual things that need to be resolved and disputes with the life planning process that can't be resolved through the chain of command. We have the People First Waiver liaisons, which can assist with questions regarding waiver services, and this does also include questions regarding the LCED. Our front door contacts can help with service access and connecting with services, with OPWDD services. There's a link here that lists all of the 7 CCOs, and it also has a coverage map. So if somebody is moving and you're working with them to try to help to understand who is available where, there's a great coverage map available at that link. And also the care management contacts at each CCO. So if someone is having an issue and they have not been able to resolve it with their care manager, or they've reached out to a care manager supervisor and they're not hearing back, or they're just looking for another contact within their CCO, this is an updated list, and we kind of refer to them as like a customer service contact, that if you're in need of touching base with somebody at a CCO to kind of help you to resolve some issues with your care manager, or to get in touch with somebody else within your care management team, they can help with that. So we encourage you to utilize that link. And then we do have our state learning management system, our SLMS system, which typically is functioning well. That today is an exception, but there are some trainings that are available within SLMS, that you also have trainings within your own CCO LMS system, and those are things that you would utilize based on your CCO direction, but these are the trainings that have been provided by OPWDD, that the benefits and entitlement trainings, that there are SSI, Medicaid, and the food stamp or SNAP trainings. There's personal allowance trainings and liability for services, that those are all searchable within the SLMS training system, where you can see when the next ones are available and what's available on the website to register and or to launch. The Willowbrook class member trainings are also available in SLMS, that are targeted to the care managers and their supervisors who have Willowbrook class members on your caseload. So of making sure that you go in and see when those trainings are available, and to make sure that you attend. And then we have a CCO override and billing training that is available for people that interface with that process of enrolling people in CCO and dealing with any billing issues that are coming up. So we encourage that you're familiar with those, but you can see when you go into SLMS that on the left-hand side, there's categories, and you can just select care coordination as a category and then see everything that's available in SLMS that relates to care coordination. So that's another good resource to go in and see if there's trainings that you're interested in or that you need to take, that they're easy to find that way. Okay. And then lastly, we have some brochures. So I don't know if these are well-known resources, so we wanted to make sure that you knew they were there and could utilize them. That, just to name a few, there's a whole list of them at this link, but to just name a few, there's aging services. There's a brochure for providing medical care for people with developmental disabilities that discusses tips for hospital discharge planning and different steps to take to support somebody that is requiring medical care. There's guardian rights that's available, family support services. There's ones on the front door and FIDA and self-direction. So there's a lot of brochures that are available there, and we encourage that you, if you take a look at them, just to have it in the back of your mind so that if you need them, they're available to you. So let me look quick to see if we have any questions. So I'm going to mute and we'll be right back. Okay, so we have just a couple of minutes before our next presentation, so I'm just going to quick go to our website. So I apologize for the people that know this well, but I just want to take a moment to walk people through quick what we have available. So the main hub of information on our website is right here: provider and staff, care coordination organizations. And here's where there's a quick button that takes you right to the CCO policy and guidance. And this is what I'm talking about with all of the updated guidance that's available and the link to our policy manual. There's also a quick link to the advisory where you'll find today's materials and the information that we share. And if you're signed up for the listserv, you'll get a notice to your email when the advisories are available, and you sign up for the listserv right here, put it right into your email, right into the box, and then go back to your email and accept the listserv invitation. And then right on the main page, here's where you'll find the recordings for today's conference and the previous conferences that have been held with the materials. So that's helpful in having these quick links so that you don't have to navigate along the side where things are a little more embedded and more difficult to find. But there's also a lot of great information for you under the information for providers. That's where you'll find a lot of the webinars with those PowerPoints. So just to hopefully help people to get an idea of where things are located. And then lastly, over under the services and supports is where you'll find CCO specific information. So here's the listing of the 7 CCOs, which will take you to the coverage map, and here are those contacts specific to the CCOs if somebody is looking to connect with somebody at the CCO to help them navigate an issue. So hopefully that's helpful. So I'm going to bring the PowerPoint back and to our tips with Mary Ellen Mosier, who is going to present now on tips for CCO care managers to foster communication and collaboration with the care planning team. Excuse me.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Amanda, for all that great information, and thank you to Allison for just providing some context of how far we've come since July 1st of 2018. So what I'm going to be presenting, tips for care managers to foster communication and collaboration with the care planning team. This is information that we've developed based on some recent feedback that we've been receiving from stakeholders based on their experiences with the life planning process. So there has been a tremendous amount of improvement since 2018, but there's still some areas where continuous quality improvement needs to be focused on. So we developed these tips very recently based on that stakeholder feedback. And as we turn our attention to continuous quality improvement, we want all CCOs and care managers to really focus on these things to a greater degree than we have been able to do so in 2018 and early 2019. So now that all life plans are almost at 100% completion, we can really start to focus on how do we improve those life plans? How do we make sure that we're focusing on the whole person and what the person wants? How do we make sure that we're involving the entire care planning team and the people that are most important and love the person that you are working with? Because those are the most important people to be part of that care planning team to help the person really develop a quality blueprint for their life that is meaningful to them. So as we move through these tips, we want to think about the compliance requirements because that is part of, your job as a care manager. So you're trying to comply with the life plan requirements that are in policy. You're trying to comply with the semi-annual review requirements. But that's only a small part of it because thinking about the whole person as the focus is really the most important part of your job. So we want to think about the whole person and try to blend those compliance requirements into your person-centered approach with facilitating life plan meetings and reviews. So one of the things that we want folks to take into consideration is the upfront work that really needs to go into the life plan and thinking about developing and revising and amending that life plan for the person. And again, now that they're done, it's time to really focus on quality improvements at the individual level to that life plan. But some of the concerns that have been expressed, very recently through this process is that some of the stakeholders don't feel that they're getting timely communication and notice of life plan meetings and reviews. So as part of, the upfront planning and the upfront work that needs to go into planning for those life plan reviews and planning for those meetings, we want folks to really think about scheduling weeks in advance those life plan meetings and making sure that the entire care planning team and the people most important to that person, and most importantly the person themselves, that those meetings are at the time and place that the person wants, and that all of the person's service providers that must implement the life plan are invited and can make that scheduled meeting. So this is really very important and can't be stressed enough that planning for that life plan meeting is just as important as facilitating it. So you want to make sure that you're working with the individual ahead of time on that invitation to include who the person wants, who is most important to that person to be included in that life plan meeting. Make sure that the care planning team all understands the purpose of the meeting that's being scheduled. Is it a semi-annual review? Has there been a change in the person's life? Is it the annual life plan meeting? It's really important that folks know what it is that they're going to be meeting on. And I also want to point out that CCOs may have standard operating procedures in place for care managers that would instruct you how far in advance you need to plan and organize for that care planning meeting. So much of the information that I'm going to cover today are quality expectations or best practices, and you should look to your CCO's policies and standard operating procedures in thinking about these tips and making sure that you're integrating how your CCO expects you to conduct the person-centered planning process. So tip number one, timely communication and notice of life plan meetings and reviews for the care planning team. So next slide. So as a care manager, your job as a facilitator is to help ensure that everyone on the care planning team can fully participate to the best of their knowledge in helping the person to develop a quality life plan. You can go to tip number 2. Okay. This is all connected, so, we tried to divide it into, specific tips, but this really is all connected information. So what I'm talking about with tip number 2, again, is really doing all of that upfront work. As the care manager, you are the facilitator for the person-centered planning process, right? And person-centered planning is a process. It's not just one meeting. It's just not one review. It's not just updating the annual life plan. It's a process of making sure that that life plan is fully engaged with the person's fully engaged with their life plan, and that it meets their goals and needs. And it's a process. It's an ongoing process. But part of that ongoing process is making sure that you're planning and organizing before meetings, that you're doing all that upfront work. And that's just as important as facilitating the meeting itself. So tip number 2 is planning and organizing the person-centered life plan meeting. So prior to the meeting, you want to make sure that you're reviewing all the information that you have about the person, including the assessments, the CAS summaries, any medical and clinical information, any previous life plan reviews, staff action plans, behavioral health plans. You want to gather all of that information about the person, and you want to start to organize that so you can facilitate an efficient and effective and informed life plan meeting. So you want to note any updates that are needed to the life plan as a result of going through this information. You want to note any questions that you have for follow-up discussions during the meeting. And you really just want to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row. So again, CCOs may have a standard operating procedure that instructs you for how you are to plan and organize prior to the life plan meeting. So you want to go to your CCO policies and procedures first. But if that isn't giving you the information you need, then these tips may be very helpful to your organization. A successful person-centered life planning process is highly dependent on the preparation and organization that the care manager puts into it as the facilitator. So we're going to go to the next slide. So tip number 2, continued. Planning and organizing, again, doing all that upfront work. So you want to make sure that you're communicating with providers before those actual meetings. So it's a best practice, you know, as a facilitator of this process, you're responsible for making sure that there's good communication practices among the care planning team, including providers. This communication and organization is going to help make your job easier in the long run. So it's really helpful and a best practice to help guide provider staff and other circle of support members responsible for participating to be knowledgeable about what they're doing when they come to the meeting. You want to specify the information that should be gathered and brought to that life plan meeting to help support the process. You want the care planning team to understand, you know, what your CCO's process is for working through any disagreements, and we're going to spend some more time on that. And, you know, if possible, providing a draft life plan as a starting point for the discussion will likely make it easier for you to facilitate that meeting. And again, this isn't about the paperwork. This is about the person. But part of your job is making sure that you're complying with your CCO policies and procedures and with the care management and the health home requirements. So it's up to you and your CCO direction that is being provided to you and the supervision that's being provided to you to figure out how you can best blend that compliance with the most important part, which is the person-centeredness of all of this and focus on the person. Okay, tip number 2, continue. We're spending a lot of time on this upfront work before you actually focus on the care planning meeting because, again, it's so important to have all that information and to be really prepared. So, planning and organization, what can you ask providers to bring to that life plan meeting? Or better yet, if you can get the providers to forward some information in advance of the life plan meeting, that's going to make everyone's job a lot easier and more efficient and effective. So you want to communicate with provider staff beforehand, if you can, to bring the relevant information about the person to the life plan meeting to inform the process. And this is anything that's really going on with the person that's important to that life plan review and that life plan process and the person-centered process. And, you know, just to point out, too, that this information is helpful to communicate to providers that if there's any change in this information, that you as the care manager would like a copy so that you can make sure that the life plan is up to date and that you as the facilitator are communicating amongst the care planning team. So what can you ask providers to bring to the life plan meeting? The person's medical and health status. Oftentimes, habilitation providers are in the best position on a day-to-day basis to know the most up-to-date clinical, medical, and health status of the people that they support. And yes, HAP providers are responsible for communicating that information to the care manager, but you can help them do their job by communicating ahead of time and asking them to, you know, provide that information. And this will ensure that the most current information regarding the person's medical status and clinical status and habilitation needs are integrated into the life plan review or the life plan meeting. So medical health status, plan of nursing services, behavioral support plans, any medication updates and changes, the person's habilitation and safeguard needs, any staff action plans, and most importantly, the progress, successes, and challenges that the provider is experiencing in that day-to-day work with the person on their staff action plan. That's all really important information to have available for the life plan meeting. And any other information that is relevant to the person-centered planning process for the person. So again, we're still on organizing and planning for that meeting. Next slide, please. So this is all about person-centered preparation. It's not about the paperwork, it's about the person's life. And I know that it's been a hard year in trying to get used to these new systems, the electronic life plan, the new template, trying to figure all of this out. And you guys have done a great job in moving this forward and really starting to understand, the new framework and the new system and where we're headed with health home services, right? So now we've really got to focus on the person-centeredness of what we're doing. And that's just, if you take nothing else away from this presentation, then I would like you to keep that in mind that, in 2020, we're focusing on the person-centeredness of what we're doing in every way, shape, and form. So again, thinking about organizing for those person-centered planning meetings, maybe prepare an outline in conjunction with the person to be able to talk to the person before the meeting and find out what their expectations and desires are for their life plan review and their life plan meeting. So again, communicating up front, yes, this is a lot of work, but this is what being person-centered is about. So thinking about what discussion questions that you want to bring to the table and that person wants to bring to the table when they go through their formal life plan meeting or review. So some of the questions that are critical to person-centeredness, you want to think about how is the person viewing their service delivery and what is the team seeing? What is the person learning? What is the team learning? What is the person struggling with? What is the team struggling with? These are kind of key questions that can really, help to get at the essential components of a person-centered plan and a person-centered process, focusing on the whole person and what's important to him and her. Next slide. So we are still on organizing and planning for that life plan meeting. Again, it's so important to be prepared and to do all of this homework and all of this upfront work and all of this communication before you actually get to that life plan meeting. So person-centered preparation. This is material from an oldie but goodie. You'll see the source at the bottom of the slide. You may have heard of this, Increasing Person-Centered Thinking, Improving the Quality of Person-Centered Planning, a manual for person-centered planning facilitators. This was developed back in 2001, I believe, but it's still very relevant to thinking about, person-centeredness. So some questions that you can think of and bring to the table in those conversations with the person either before their life plan meeting and during the life plan meeting include a number of sort of domain areas that are important. So how can we as the care planning team help increase the person's presence in local community life? How can we help the person expand and deepen friendships and other important relationships? How can we help the person have more control and choice in their life? How can we help the person develop and enhance their skills and contribute based on their unique gifts? How can we help the person find new possibilities and desirable experiences? How can we emphasize the person's dreams, desires, meaningful experiences? May focus on the home the person wishes to live in someday. the kind of work and meaningful community experiences and activities that the person wants to do. This is really the crux, those key questions that we all have in our own life that we want to focus on. So this is really the heart of the person-centered planning process, the focus on these things. Okay, we are still on planning and organizing. We're almost done with that, though, planning and organizing. So tip number 2 continued, the person-centered planning meeting. And again, your CCO may have standard operating procedures that instruct you how you are to proceed with a life plan meeting. So this is just an example for your illustration purposes to see how you might go about organizing for the meeting. So, first again, you want to make sure before people come to that meeting that they understand why they're meeting. What are their expectations? Most importantly, what is the person's expectations for their meeting? It's not just about meeting the annual and the semi-annual review requirements, although that's a part of it. But it's really about what the person wants to accomplish, and getting that information from the pre-discussions beforehand will be very helpful to you and the person and the care planning team. So you might think about starting out with the person just giving an overview, if they're able, about what their vision is for their life over the next year and what they want to achieve through their life planning process or review. Because it's really their meeting at the end of the day, so let them give out their vision to the team. And again, this is just an example for your consideration. Make sure that you are following your internal CCO policies and procedures if they have them related to the plan meeting. So, the next section is, you want to have that plan discussion. You want to focus on, what's the progress with service delivery? How are goals helping to meet the person's vision for his or her life? What needs to be changed and why? What challenges need to be addressed and why? What obstacles need to be overcome for the person's vision of their life to come to fruition? And going back to the information on slides 19 and 20 that I already covered, those key questions for person-centeredness, and bringing that into the discussion. So the next part of the meeting, might be to summarize the goals and supports and who they are assigned to as part of the life planning process, and any areas of disagreement that you were not able to work through during the person-centered planning process. You want to be really clear with the team on what those areas of disagreement are and making sure that you're documenting them. Because when we get to talking about the dispute resolution process, there is a requirement for documenting any disagreements that can't be worked through for the finalized life plan. It needs to be documented in the IDT summary of the life plan. And then you really want to make sure that before that meeting ends, that you are talking about what the next steps are and the timeline. When is that life plan expected to be finalized? When can providers, the person, the other members of the care planning team expect to get a copy of that life plan? When can you expect to hear about how any disagreements will be worked through? What is that process? And any other next steps that need to be taken into consideration to finalize that life plan and to really get going on working with the person on those goals and supports. So again, this is just an example for illustration purposes only of what a life plan meeting might contain. And again, preparation and organizing before the meeting takes just as much time or more time than the actual process of facilitating that dialogue. If you're doing all of the work that we're talking about here, that's going to take more time, and you're going to be more prepared to facilitate a quality person-centered planning meeting. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. Tip number 3, work on developing good facilitation skills. So a good facilitator is non-judgmental. They're a good listener, they're self-confident, they're flexible, genuine, and hospitable. This is all from that oldie and goodie guide on facilitating a person-centered planning meeting. So you want to learn how to improve your skills in facilitating. You want to learn how to use pacing to move the process along. Good listening skills, do more listening than talking. You want to build teamwork to enhance the effectiveness of the process. You want to develop skills in building consensus, fostering self-determination of the person as part of the process, and building really good relationships and trust with that care planning team will help to build consensus. And helping the group celebrate successes and accomplishments that the person achieves, and also looking at what can be improved if things didn't go so well. Okay, next slide. So tip number 3, developing that facilitation skill, is also about fostering the team, the care planning team, through collaboration and communication. So some of these things may or may not be helpful depending upon the teams that you're working with. We're all individuals. We all have unique ways of doing things. We all have unique personalities. So you can use some of these team building techniques as necessary for improvements to that teamwork. So sometimes you might need ground rules. If you have a person who is always doing all the talking and people can't get in a word edgewise, you might want to think about how can we develop some ground rules for this team. Some other examples, thinking about positive problem solving. If you have a naysayer on the team, maybe you need some ground rules around, okay, let's think about this positively. Let's try to overcome these challenges in a very positive way. And then enlisting the help of the other people on the team to help ensure that there's a positive tone to what's going on. So there's a lot of things you can do to foster that team through collaboration, and these tips that you can focus on. But it really depends on what's going on with that unique team. And the techniques that you use for one care planning team might not work with a different care planning team depending upon the members. So again, facilitating the meeting, you're fostering good teamwork, you're using consensus building strategies. You want to figure out how to stimulate that creative thinking. Sometimes that involves using tools to promote new ideas and solutions. Myself, I love using white paper and markers in meetings, that can sometimes help focus people on an idea, so think about what else you can bring to the table that can help facilitate that meeting successfully. You want to make sure that the purpose of the meeting and the person's vision for his or her life is front and center. And you want to listen and listen some more and listen beneath the surface and listen to the unsaid and listen with a third ear. Next slide. So how do we build consensus? If we've got some disagreements among this team, what are you as the facilitator going to do to help try to get to consensus? So again, active listening is really important. I know that one of my weaknesses when I do things is that I'm always thinking about what I'm going to say next. And sometimes when you're thinking about what you're going to say next, you're not really listening to what's going on, and you miss a lot of things. So you really want to try to suspend your own thought processes to give speakers your full attention. And even if you don't agree with what they're saying, you want to make a deliberate effort to understand their position and where they're coming from. Because by understanding where they're coming from and really understanding why they're focusing on whatever it is that they're focusing on that's a disagreement with the team, that you will be able to build consensus by taking what's important to them and maybe putting it together with what someone else is saying and coming up with a solution that makes sense across the board. So summarizing is really important to building consensus. Doing short and active summaries of what's been said so far for the team can help move the team towards a decision. So maybe you need to try outlining the common ground and then being clear about, okay, it seems like we've reached agreement on this, but this is the part that we need to further explore. And then make sure with the team that you got that right so that you can at least level set. Here's where we are. And synthesis is another technique for building consensus, finding that common ground and trying to make connections between competing ideas and maybe weaving them together to form new options, and focusing on positive solutions that may address the fundamental need and the key concerns of the people who are disagreeing. So sometimes this can work because that person that's disagreeing may be so wedded to their point of view that if you can get them to listen and you can get them to participate in brainstorming, the team itself might come up with a whole new solution that will work for the person. Okay, next slide. I'm sorry, what?
10 minutes before we do questions.
Oh, am I running short on time?
We'll to give some time for questions before our next presentation if we
Okay, I need to go quicker. Amanda's telling me I'm taking too much time.
We've had some great questions.
And I'm only on tip 3.
No, and it's very good.
Building consensus, here's some language that you might want to use. We seem to all agree that blah, 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 and we seem to disagree with blah, 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 and articulate that issue, and then look for pros and cons of the alternative options. Can aspects of the options be combined for a new option? Check in with the team to see if you can now reach consensus. Next. So tip number 4 is about summarizing that life plan meeting or review before the meeting ends. And we've covered this in other presentations, but you need to make sure that everybody is walking away with a common understanding of the next steps and where they come in. You also want to think as a best practice of maybe doing meeting summaries. You can ask somebody on the team to be a scribe for the meeting and summarizing that information. And we're going to talk about the IDT meeting summary for disagreements in the next presentation. Tip number 5. So updates and amendments to the life plan. So it seems like what we've been hearing from some stakeholders is that when a change is made to the life plan, they can't always tell what's changed without comparing the former life plan to the new life plan. So it would be really helpful, and this is a tip, to make sure you send a short note or email to highlight what has changed so that providers and other stakeholders don't spend unnecessary time comparing life plan versions. Tip number 6, going forward, consider collaborating with providers to integrate the staff action plan review as part of the life plan meeting or review. This will help ensure information sharing, coordination, alignment, and team building across the team. So some of those staff action plan elements that need to be part of what the provider does in the review is looking at the progress of the individual, including accomplishments and prevention of regression, looking at whether there's any challenges that have been experienced and whether any new strategies or methodologies to overcome those challenges need to be implemented, and whether the person is satisfied with their supports and services. Now, these are the very similar kinds of things that the care manager is doing with the life plan. So why not think about combining those two things on a regular basis? You get more information as the care manager, the provider has the full picture, and you guys can work together to accomplish your compliance requirements, but most importantly, get at what the person wants and the holistic approach to that person and what's meaningful to them. we can skip the next slide because that's on the staff action plan. Again, tip number 8. I can't stress this one enough either. We've been hearing a lot of concern that life plans are not, the finalized life plan is not getting to stakeholders. So, you know, providers only have 60 days from the start of the life plan meeting or the HAB service, whichever comes first, to develop and revise the staff action plan and provide it to the care manager. It's really important that they have a copy of that finalized life plan to ensure that those goals and supports are aligned in the staff action plan. So please make sure that you are adhering to any standard operating procedure that your CCO has put forth for when you need to make sure that life plan is distributed to all of the essential parties. Okay, so in summary, communication and collaboration is essential. Establishing cooperation, collaboration, team building, using your facilitation skills, and coming to agreement is critical to making sure the person has a very person-centered plan that's meaningful to them. And remember, partnership, communication, and collaboration is the key to all of this. So that's what these tips have really been about in this presentation. So a couple of parting words for this particular segment. Collaboration expectations. This is a review of quality checkpoints. The person's included in the life plan and is the driver to the extent he or she desires. All major providers that implement the plan are including it in the life plan meeting, and the person and all major service providers understand and agree to what is assigned to them. So this is review, but very important takeaways. Now, in thinking about how person-centered was your approach as the care manager to evaluate the process, think about some of these questions. And again, this is from that oldie and goodie that I mentioned before. Did the dreams and desires of the individual form the foundation for the process? Did the process identify and build upon the individual's gifts and talents? Was there discussion of the individual's ideals with home, work, relationships, community life, choices, self-determination? Were team strategies devised during the process to help the person overcome any challenges and obstacles? And did the individual drive and participate in all phases of the process to the extent desired and able? Okay. So that is that.
For a moment to review some of the questions that have come in through the Q&A, and we'll come right back online. Okay, we are back. So we did have a question about the engagement of the individual in the life plan meeting if somebody is not willing or able to attend. And we just want to emphasize that, as Mary Ellen had said, that this is a person-centered process. And as we've always said, the person should be engaged in the life plan meeting to the extent that they are willing and able. If the person has a guardian that is not able to be physically available, that you're using all means to engage that person, and that it really needs to be well documented what has been attempted and what resolutions are in place, and then of what future actions are being considered to continue to engage the person and the people that are most important to them in the person-centered planning process. But the life plan meeting does need to occur and should not be withholding the implementation of that plan. So Mary Ellen, we had a question about the draft life plan, if that is a suggested tool for consensus at a meeting. So if you just want to speak to that again.
The, being able to provide a draft life plan in advance of the meeting to the care planning team is potentially a best practice. Some CCOs have adopted that approach, and it seems to really help the process along. I think, the caution with that is that you want to make sure that you're communicating that that's really just the starting point. If there's changes that are needed that the care manager has identified through the review of the information, through the conversation with the person, through the conversation with the care planning team ahead of time, making sure that when you're providing that draft life plan, and again, it's a best practice, it's not a requirement, but communicating to the team that this is a starting point based on the planning and dialogue that has occurred prior to the meeting. And that there's opportunities, and that this is about using this as just a guide and getting all of the care planning team engaged in discussion of that is helpful as a best practice. We have heard from several CCOs that have implemented this. It is not a requirement.
Could you also talk about guidance regarding CCO's distribution of the life plan?
It has been pointed out by some stakeholders that our ADMs don't provide a required time frame for when the finalized life plan needs to be distributed. And there has been some request that OPWDD provide that timeline. However, at this point in time, we don't have a requirement that within 50 days a finalized life plan has to be provided to the team. We suggest that CCOs, care managers, work within their CCOs, go through their chain of command, and make sure that if your CCO does not have a policy already in place for this, that you think about what makes sense and set up your own, system to make sure that life plan is distributed timely. I mean, we will be looking at this in surveys and reviews, making sure that the care planning team that is supposed to get a copy of that finalized life plan has indeed received it. So as the care manager, it's up to you to document that finalized life plan has been provided. And so, you really want to have a trigger for when you're doing that so that you can make sure that it's consistent across the board.
Great, thank you. And that finalized life plan, obviously, to be finalized, it does need to be signed. And if there's a reason, you'll get more into that with dispute resolution. But there's
right. And of course, when the system moves to an electronic portal, some of these things may be alleviated through the electronic sharing of that information. So we're really looking forward to that, as I think you as care managers are as well.
Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about the plans for providing more of this information to our provider community?
Sure. We've done some versions of this information for providers. I was at the Day Service Providers Symposium in November and presented on very similar information from a provider perspective. So, we can definitely look internally about doing a lunch and learn for providers on collaboration with care managers so that there's both pieces of that. So we'll talk about that internally and think about maybe doing something in early 2020.
Great, thank you. We're going to pause for one more moment to look at any new questions coming in, and then we'll move on to our next presentation. All right, we are going to move on to review of the life plan dispute resolution process, and we'll have a little bit of time at the end of this as well to answer some questions that might relate to some of the things that were brought up in the last presentation. Again, I turn it over to you, Mary Ellen.
Okay, thank you. So this section of information is pretty much what we presented at the June quarterly conference for the life plan dispute resolution process. This is information that's outlined in the overarching ADM 2018-ADM-06R, Transition to People First Care Coordination, that was reissued May 9th of 2019. So we've been hearing some concerns, though, that lead us to believe that this process isn't quite understood or isn't being followed. So that's why we wanted to make sure that we presented this information again and tried to be really clear with what the expectations are and what the path forward is to getting to this dispute resolution. Okay, so next slide. I'm going to go through this quickly. The person-centered planning process, here we just want to remind folks that the regulations that OPW has for person-centered planning requires that there are strategies that are being developed that address conflicts or disagreements in the person-centered planning process. This is not just for CCOs, this is also for providers and for the staff action plan, and that there's clear conflict of interest guidelines for individuals and that this information is communicated. Next. So again, we went over the collaboration and consensus building in the last presentation, but this is just a nice little visual as a reminder that it takes all the parties working together to reach a consensus and to deal with any disagreements in the life planning process. We do expect, next slide, we do expect that CCOs spend time working with care managers to understand how to facilitate life planning meetings and how to develop consensus. And we also expect that CCOs are working with people on, or working with care managers to develop the skills for person-centered planning. We expect CCOs to have standard operating procedures in these areas and to have a standard operating procedure for what the care manager does when they are not able to build consensus on an area of disagreement. Where does the care manager go? There needs to be a standard operating procedure that instructs the care manager what they have to do on their end to get through this process. And the DDRO is the last resort to be consulted when disagreement cannot be resolved between the care manager and the care planning team. And the first step is that the care manager goes through their chain of command. So there should be a policy and procedure at every CCO that outlines what that internal dispute resolution process is first before the DDRO ever hears about the situation. And that should all be documented in the records for the person. So we're going to move to the next slide. Okay, so this is just emphasizing finding solutions and working through the care planning team, so we can move to the next slide. So let's get to the mechanics of the process. So what do you do? What do you do when resolution cannot be reached during that life planning process within that 45-day time frame that life plan needs to be finalized? So that disagreement is going to emerge during the life planning process. The care manager is going to use all of their skills and all of their abilities to try to build consensus with that team first. And they're going to attempt to get resolution, right? But if that doesn't work, the care manager is going to go through their CCO's internal chain of command and their internal dispute resolution process. So if you are a care manager and you do not know what your CCO's internal dispute resolution process is, you need to talk to your supervisor and get that information ASAP, okay? So that's the next step. So if through that CCO's dispute resolution process, the resolution it's still not resolved, technical assistance can be provided by the DDRO at that point, but only after the whole dispute resolution internal process with the CCO has gone through the process, has been documented, and it's very clear what's going on. And it should be a higher level person in your CCO that's taking that matter to the DDRO. So then what you want to do, because we don't want to hold up life plans for a disagreement, right? We still have to finalize that life plan within 45 days and get that life plan implemented. So if the disputed element is a new goal, support, or safeguard that hasn't previously been in the person's life plan, or if it's an initial life plan, it hasn't previously been in the person's ISP, then you need to document that disagreement in the IDT summary of the life plan. That disagreed upon element does not go into section 2 or 3 of the life plan as a goal or support. Okay, let me just say that again. If the disagreement is based on a goal or support that was not previously in the life plan or the ISP, it was not previously ever agreed to, it gets documented in the IDT summary of the life plan. It does not stay as a goal or support in section 2 or 3, okay? Now, the disputed element might have already been approved in a prior life plan or a prior ISP. So in that case, if it's associated with an already approved ISP or life plan, then we're going to keep that in section 2 or 3 of the life plan, and we're still going to describe the dispute in the IDT summary of the life plan. But the care planning team, the providers, whoever it is expected to keep working on that formally agreed upon goal or support with the person. There is an avenue for working that through, which we're going to cover. So hopefully that's clear. So within 45 days of that life plan meeting, the care manager and the individual or his or her representative need to sign the life plan. We know that there are some issues with not being able to get signatures on the life plan. So if that is the case, document, 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 but don't hold up implementing the person's life plan for those reasons. So the life plan is considered final when it is signed by the individual and the care manager. Any disputed elements are summarized in the IDT meeting summary section. So we all know that providers acknowledge and agree to deliver the provider-assigned goals, supports, and safeguards associated with their services in Section 2 and 3 of the life plan. Then the staff action plans are developed and signed by habilitation staff and forwarded to the care manager based on the agreed upon mechanism for that prompt communication. In addition to care managers, providers should also be providing that staff action plan to the individual and his or her representative and any other parties agreed to by the person and his or her representative. Next slide. So once the life plan and the staff action plan are finalized, if any element remains in dispute and no agreement has been able to be reached, there is the due process in 633.12 of OPWDD regulations, which is the objection to a plan of services. So at this point, and the ADM describes this whole process that I'm going over, but at this point, an individual or their representative could object to the plan. A provider can now object to something in the plan if they cannot deliver on that goal or support. But during the pending due process, all elements of the finalized life plan and staff action plan need to be implemented. Next slide. Okay, so that covers the dispute resolution process again. And again, we have not been seeing or hearing that disputes are getting resolved through this process. We're not quite clear why that is, but we are assuming that it's been a lack of understanding with what the process is, which is why we covered it again. So again, care managers, please make sure you're adhering to the dispute resolution process that your CCO has in their policies and procedures. And if you don't know what that is, please find out very soon, like ASAP. All right.
Great. Thank you, Mary Ellen. So we're going to pause for a moment to review the questions that have come in, and then we'll be right back online. Okay, we are back online. We've had a lot of questions come in. So like I've said before, we encourage you to work with your CCO leadership on parsing out what the steps should be with the dispute resolution process if you're not hearing back from providers and different things that are coming up. But Mary Ellen, do you mind starting off with an example and kind of walking through with an example this dispute process to maybe make it more clear for some people?
Okay. There is an example in the ADM, so I can just go ahead and read that example. If you have a copy of this ADM, page 5 starts the dispute resolution during the life planning process. So example A, during the life planning process, the individual or her advocate requests the ability to participate in a certain type of community inclusion activity, but the provider who would be supporting that service asserts that the request is not clinically appropriate. In the event the care manager is unable to facilitate a resolution of this dispute, the care manager would move the community inclusion goal out of the life plan and into the summary of the IDT meeting section. Okay, example B, during the life planning process, the individual or her advocate requests that additional staffing be included for a pre-existing community inclusion activity, but the provider who would be supporting the service asserts that the request is not clinically appropriate. So this example is something that had already been approved in the life plan, but the individual wants additional staffing for this community inclusion activity. So in the event the care manager cannot facilitate resolution of this dispute, the care manager would leave the prior existing community inclusion goal in the life plan unchanged and include a narrative in the summary of IDT meeting section regarding the nature of the staffing dispute. Okay, so hopefully that helps a little bit with this.
And that's available in the ADM?
It is in the ADM on page 5 and 6 of 2018 ADM 06R, which is on OPW's website in the link that Amanda provided under resources.
Thank you.
We also received a question about who is responsible for distributing the staff action plan. I'd just like to point out that is also documented in that same ADM that Mary Ellen just referenced.
Mm-hmm. And it is the provider.
Another question we received regarding the dispute process is the process the same for Willowbrook class members?
Yes. The process, as it stands now, applies to all individuals and all care planning team members that have the right to use 633-12 objection to plan of care.
One of the other questions was, what should we do if there are disagreements over the frequency, duration, and time frame of the goals outlined in the life plan?
Okay. Well, this question really gets back to doing that upfront work and planning and organizing and bringing the appropriate information and questions to the table, you know, ideally before the life plan meeting even happens. But frequency, duration, and time frame in Section 2 or 3 have to do directly with the goal or support that is under discussion. So, the care manager, should be building consensus during the team meeting on those frequency, durations, and life plans. If you're doing that during the person-centered planning process, then it shouldn't be a surprise to the provider when they get that finalized life plan.
Thank you. We received another question. So in the event that there's a dispute, and you had mentioned that all items in the life plan are implemented, upon the finalized life plan. But in the event that there's a dispute, during the due process, does that include the items that are written in the IDP summary? So basically what I think they're asking is, when we say that a life plan has to be implemented, is it everything that is in the life plan and not in the IDT section, because that's being disputed? So can you just clarify how that works in the care manager's role?
Can you go back to that the slide with the visual? So the question is, does the information in the IDT summary need to be implemented for the finalized life plan? And the answer is, it depends on whether the disputed element was previously agreed to in a prior life plan or a prior ISP. If the item was previously agreed to in the prior life plan or the prior ISP, and now there's an issue with it, then it still needs to be continue to be implemented, because it was something that was already previously agreed to in the plan of care. If the disputed element is something that was not previously agreed to in a finalized life plan or an ISP, then it gets written up in the IDT summary, and it does not get implemented until the process goes through to resolution, in which case the life plan would need to be updated to include it in Section 2 or 3 once that issue's been resolved.
Great, thank you. We did receive a question about providers not, appearing to not fully understand the staff action plan and life plan requirements. Amanda, can you just, they would like to know if there's someone who the care managers can direct them to. Can you just reiterate the?
Right, when we covered, excuse me, when we covered the slide of the OPWDD contacts, there is the care coordination support liaisons, and there are the OPWDD waiver liaisons that can assist with the mediation and information sharing. But we really are, as Mary Ellen has emphasized, focusing on collaboration, that if within the care planning team, resolution and functional communication can't occur on some of these points, that it's going up through the chain of command to have leadership within each agency working together to come together on that, but absolutely reaching out to OPWDD, the waiver liaison, and the care coordination support liaison when needed.
I would only add that, Amanda, you had shared in your resources the bi-weekly information sessions for care managers and providers that we held. And there's nothing wrong with sharing those links with providers that you're working with, as part of that collaboration and teamwork. Share them. They're recorded. The PowerPoints are there. It makes it that you're sending the same message that OPWDD is.
Absolutely. Okay. So we are going to move on in our presentation. I'd also just like to note that we do review the things that have come in and use this information to inform future presentation. So things that maybe we weren't able to get to today, we will review and consider for future information sharing and understanding what information and issues you guys are having and what you need. Okay, so we are going to move on for a quick run through of the cost of living 2020 updates with Elena DiStefano before we move on to our guardianship and medical decision making presentation. So this was a delayed hot topic. Hi, Elena.
All right, so just wanted to let you guys know that the cost of living adjustment applies for people both in certified residences like the ICF FIRAs and community residences and for people living at home. The 2020 payment levels for Social Security income are up on the slide right now. Just to let you know, these payment levels will change annually whenever there's a cost of living adjustment. This year's cost of living adjustment was a 1.6% increase for 2020. Just to clarify, in case, because we always get this question, independent living under SSI is people living at home, people living with their parents, people living off on their own. There are different levels because based on what kind of supports a person receives in a home and if they get food or shelter from other individuals living in that home, Social Security will say either they're living in the household of another or they're living alone, and they will adjust the SSI appropriately. And just one small reminder for folks out there who are dealing with folks moving in and out of certified living arrangements, if you are moving from one living arrangement to another living arrangement, you do get the higher of the two payments for any given month. When there is a cost of living increase for Social Security, there's also a cost of living increase for Medicaid. So the information for Medicaid is on the following slide on page 59. These income levels are the countable income in the months received. Medicaid looks at the countable income and they compare it to where the person is living, and that's your maximum amount that you're allowed to have for that living arrangement without being on a spend down. Resource levels were also increased to $15,750, and for those of you who have people on Medicaid buy-in for working people with disabilities, that did not increase. That's only at $20,000. All of these things are posted on our OPWDD website. If you do not have access to the website, it's also under resources and benefits information, and then on the left side you can look under SSI and Social Security. So if you don't have access, to the PowerPoint, you can still find that information. These have not been placed on the website yet. We're waiting for our communications department to upload them. So right now you will only see the 2019, but the 2020 information is in the slides. Also, we have sent out those slides and those levels to various people who are on our benefits mailing list. If you would like to be added to our email benefits list and also be able to send us any questions you may have about benefits, you can do so by emailing us your information at field.operations@opwdd.ny.gov. So again, that email address, if you want to be added to our listserv so you can get the cost of living adjustments whenever they come out, is field.operations@opwdd.ny.gov. Hopefully y'all have no questions and we can go on to guardianship because I'm interested in hearing about that.
We do have a little bit of time, so we can pause for a moment. We have a full 4 minutes, so we can pause to see if anybody does have any questions on the information that Elena just shared. So we'll just give you a minute. All right, it looks like we're all set. So I just want to take a moment to just pause and go back and say thank you very much, Mary Ellen. That was a lot of great information delivered in a way that I think was really engaging and helpful. So I hope people found that information useful and people definitely seemed engaged on it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are going to move on to guardianship and medical decision making. We have Eileen Zabel with us from our counsel's office. So we'll just pause for a moment while we shift around. Okay. Good morning, Eileen.
Good morning.
Afternoon now.
Okay, so we're going to start with a basic review of guardianship. And there are 2 guardianship statutes in New York State. One is in the mental hygiene law, which actually is the guardianship statute for the general population, which I know is a little confusing because it's in the mental hygiene law and people think that that's the provision, but it isn't. The provision in the Surrogates Court Procedure Act is for people with intellectual or developmental disability or TBI. So we'll talk a little bit about each one and the differences. So Article 81 is general guardianship, can be used for any person who is alleged to be incapacitated, regardless of the basis of the incapacity. So elderly people, people who have dementia and those kinds of things would apply for guardianship under this statute. And it's a more tailored guardianship. The guardian only has the authority that is outlined in the order. So there are usually categories of decisions that they are able to make. And it is, because it is more tailored, it is a lengthier process and it's more expensive. It's done in Supreme Court, so it can take a while. And generally you need a lawyer because it is a more complex statute and there are more, nuances that have to be discussed. And the other thing is that a guardian can be appointed by the court. The court would have a list of people who have gone through the required training to be appointed as guardians, and they get paid for that. So that's another option. And we see that sometimes with hospitals when we have an individual who's in a hospital and we don't have anyone to consent to them going to a nursing home and they want to discharge the person. They sometimes go to court and they get a court-appointed guardian who has the authority to make the placement decision on the individual's behalf. 17A was put into law by parents of individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities. The purpose of it is really to extend the natural guardianship that you have over your children until they turn 18. So, the trend now is really away from guardianship, and 17A is a very all-encompassing guardianship. The guardian has very broad authority. There are no specific categories as there are in 81. So, it can be difficult sometimes to know, where the line is or sort of what decisions, but generally it's very broad. It does give the guardians very broad authority. We'll talk about the medical and the end-of-life decision-making in a few minutes, but it is a very broad statute. It's very inexpensive. It's like $35 to apply for the guardianship. The forms are through the surrogates offices in the various counties throughout the state. The forms are relatively simple so that the family, you really don't have to have an attorney to do this type of guardianship. But you do have to have someone willing to serve as the guardian. So sometimes that can be a roadblock if you don't have someone who's willing to take on that responsibility. And there are also corporate guardians. NYSARC has a very large corporate guardianship program. People Inc. has a corporate guardianship program. So sometimes that is another possibility for people. So in addition to the 2 different statutes, there's 2 types of guardianship under both statutes. You can have guardianship of the person or guardianship of the property or both. So guardianship of the person gives the guardian the authority to make decisions about the individual's personal needs, where they live, what kind of assistance they need, sign the HIPAA releases for access to confidential records, applying for their benefits, and consenting to major medical or dental, in addition to the end-of-life decision-making, which we'll get to. Guardianship of the property gives the guardian authority over the individual's financial affairs, entering into contracts, paying bills, investments. We usually see this with people who have a supplemental needs trust. So if they they come into money based on a lawsuit, medical malpractice, something like that. There's often a guardianship of the property so that money can be used for additional expenses for the individual beyond which is ordinarily covered by Medicaid and what we would usually see. So that does allow for additional expenses, and it doesn't impact their Medicaid eligibility. Okay, so that's really about it for guardianship, the two statutes. We usually see 17A because it is so much easier and cheaper and quicker, so the families usually have 17A.
Do you want to pause now to see if there's any questions on guardianship before we move on?
Sure.
Okay, so we can take a moment to see if people have questions on this that relate to what Eileen would be able to speak to from the legal perspective. Okay, we'll move on, and we'll also pause at the end of this portion of the presentation, so if something comes up related to guardianship, you can speak to it then.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you can ask questions as we go along. If, sometimes that's easier. While we have the slide up and we're talking about it, you don't have to wait till the end.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the Healthcare Decisions Act, which is in the Surrogates Court Procedure Act, Section 1750-B, and it first became law in 2003. So it, for the first time, gave and it was limited to 17A guardians, and it was limited to people with MR when it originally was passed in 2003. So it was only MR, and you had to be a guardian, but it did allow the guardian to make an end-of-life decision, but there is a process that has to take place. It's not as simple as the guardian just making the decision. So there's been a lot of confusion about that. I know a lot of parents think that if they're the guardian, they can simply make the decision, and it isn't as simple as that because there is a process that has to be gone through, and certain entities have the ability to object. So, but it was a very big change in the law because previously there was no way to withhold or withdraw life-sustaining treatment unless the individual had expressed what they wanted by clear and convincing evidence. So that obviously was a very unfair standard for people who never had the capacity to make their own decisions. So over the years, it's been incrementally expanded. The original law actually did not allow corporate guardians to make the end-of-life decisions, so that was changed. Then it was expanded to developmental disabilities, and probably the biggest change was that it was expanded to allow actively involved family members to make these decisions. Again, it has to go through the process, but you don't have to be the 17A legal guardian. You can make the decision as an actively involved family member, and the list is in the regulations in 633.10, and it's the same list as in 633.11. 633.10 has the end-of-life decision-making provisions, and 633.11 is the basic consent for medical treatment, major medical treatment. So in addition to actively involved family members, we have the Surrogate Decision-Making Committee. So if the person does not have an actively involved, they have no actively involved family, we can go to the Surrogate Decision-Making Committee, which is, again, under the mental hygiene law. They are now part of the Justice Center, and that's where their forms are on the Justice Center website. And they have the authority to make end-of-life decisions in addition to providing consent for major medical treatment for individuals who don't have actively involved family. If someone has an actively involved family and they are not consenting to the treatment, we cannot go to SDMC. You have to not have an authorized surrogate in order to utilize that process. So if you have someone who's not consenting, that would require a court application. SDMC cannot overrule an actively involved family member's decision. In addition, for the Willowbrook class members that are fully represented, the CAB has the authority to make these decisions also. So the law is really just very basic under 17A. You need 2 certifications from a physician or a licensed psychologist to say that the person, I mean, it's a very, very broad standard, and I mean, it was done by the parents, so that's why it is so broad. There have now, more recently, DRNY has tried to challenge the constitutionality of the statute. You know, they feel that it's too broad, it takes too many rights away from the individual. But so far, this is still the law, so, and the families want it this way. So there's been there's a tension there, and we'll just have to see what happens down the road. But the one additional requirement that was added is that the certifications have to say whether or not the person has the capacity to make healthcare decisions. That was a new requirement. The difficulty that we sometimes run into is that it's an all or nothing proposition. And sometimes the psychologists say, well, they could probably make some healthcare decisions, but not more complicated decisions, or if there's a lot of risks and benefits that need to be weighed out, that might be a little too much for them. But it's all or nothing. So unless the person can make all their own healthcare decisions, we would recommend that the clinicians say that they do not have the capacity, because if you say they have the capacity, then the guardian won't have that authority. So it is, going to hamper the guardian down the road if the person has the capacity, because then we're going to need their capacity before any decision can be made. The guardian would not be able to make the decision on their behalf. Oh, yes. So the retroactivity. When the law first was passed, the guardians who had gotten their guardianship since 1969, when Article 17A became law, wanted to know if the law would apply to them retroactively. Because the requirement about the person's ability to make healthcare decisions was new in the law, and that had not been part of the application years ago when many of the families got their guardianship. So when the law was first passed, we were telling family members that they needed to go back and have their guardianship amended to give them this authority. But the Court of Appeals case came down and they said, no, it applies retroactively. So any family member that has a 17A guardianship, regardless of when they got the guardianship, has the authority to make these end-of-life decisions. It would have to be specifically excluded in the newer guardianships. If it's not specifically excluded, they do have the authority. But again, it does have to go through the process. And that, I think, is where there's a lot of misunderstanding with the families, that, they think that if they have the guardianship, they can just make the decision. But there is a process that we have to go through.
So there's a question that came through of there's some on guardianship that we can cover after that don't directly relate to this, but does the statute cover just medical decisions, or does it cover things like who should care for the person should the caregiver pass away, what would happen to the house the person lives in, et cetera?
No, it only covers, this law only covers withholding or withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment from the individual. And it doesn't matter, we use the same law regardless of if the person lives in a certified residence or not. There's different notifications that we'll get to, but it applies, based on a diagnosis, really, based on a diagnosis of a developmental disability.
Okay. And then there's a question regarding if the caregiver sets this up on their own.
No, because it's a medical order, so they would have to work through their physician to get the order. And the difficulty is that the person has to meet the statutory criteria at the time. So they can't really be, an otherwise healthy individual who happens to have a developmental disability. And I know a lot of times the families want to try to plan, and they want to have a DNR in place so that in the event that they're no longer here when their family member, does require that kind of care later in life, and it can't be done that way. The person has to meet the criteria at the time the decision is being made. So it really is not a tool for future planning or advanced care planning.
Okay.
So the standard really in the law, this is the basic standard, is that the guardian has the affirmative obligation to advocate for the full and efficacious provision. So basically, it just means that the person is supposed to be considered, their medical condition is supposed to be considered regardless of their developmental disability. That really should be put to the side and should not be a consideration. It should really just be based on the person's medical condition, and they make the decision in what is, the person's best interest. If they do know the person's wishes, if the person has specific wishes, the guardian is supposed to take that into consideration in making the decision based on their best interest. So these are the factors in the law that the guardian is supposed to consider in determining the person's best interest. So, basically it's, they're supposed to really consider all the information about the person and what their condition is and what the treatment options are and how burdensome some of those treatment options might be for the individual. So, the final criteria is the entire medical condition of the person, and really that, I think, captures what is supposed to be considered. Oh, and then there is language in the statute about improper influences. So, again, there's not supposed to be a presumption that the person is not entitled to the same equal rights and the same medical care and dignity that any other individual would be entitled to. And financial considerations, obviously, would also be an improper influence. So decisions regarding life-sustaining treatment, this is the crux of this law and what decisions come within it and what the process is. So there is a specific process for any decision regarding withholding or withdrawing of life-sustaining treatment. So that the decision of what is life-sustaining treatment is medical treatment, including CPR and artificial nutrition and hydration, which is sustaining the person, and within reasonable medical judgment, the person will die within a relatively short time period. That's really very subjective, and we don't really, it's not as though the person has to die within a certain period of time. That's absolutely not the way that works. It's really just a subjective decision, but they do have to have some type of medical condition. It cannot just be based on their developmental disability and used as a planning tool. So then this is the order of priority for the decisions. The first is an Article 17A guardian. If you have an Article 17A guardian, that would be the person with the authority to make this decision. If not, then we go to a qualified family member, would have to be actively involved, and you have to go down the list from the top. And if there's anyone in that category, that's who you have to go to. So, first would be a spouse if you have one. If not, a parent, actively involved adult child, adult sibling, adult family member, and then again, the CAB if they fully represent the Willowbrook class member, or the surrogate decision-making committee, which again is under the Justice Center for the protection of people with special needs.
And just a quick, because there's been a couple of questions, this one here about clarifying 17A, that this is for individuals, for adults, of just clarifying what's meant by a 17A guardian, because there's some questions where somebody's asking if it's for people under 17 years old. There are some other ones, so just as we keep referring to it, to just clarify that again.
Yes, this is for an adult. So yes, beyond the age, because there is a different list for minors, not under, because if the person is under 18, the parents are the natural guardians. So we wouldn't usually see a guardianship for someone who's under the age of 18 because the parents are the guardians. But if not, if there could potentially, I suppose, be a guardian for someone who was a minor, and the guardian might not be the parent. And that person would, if they had a 17A guardianship, they would have the authority. Yeah.
Okay. So that helps to clarify. Thank you.
One question that came in that piggybacks directly to this is, can you define actively involved?
It's a very broad definition in 633.99 in the glossary. Significant and ongoing involvement in the person's life so as to have knowledge of their needs, or something like that. So it is a fairly vague definition, and it's pretty rare that we would contest someone's active involvement, unless it's someone that, you know, the team has never heard of, the team has no knowledge of this family member, and they sort of, you know, come out of the woodwork at the 11th hour or something. That we would, you know, say is not actively involved. But generally, if there's a family member that the team usually goes to, this is who usually consents and who they would go to if there was an issue, and who they, even if they only communicate them by phone, that would be sufficient. There certainly isn't any requirement that they visit the person a certain number of times or anything like that. So, but it should be someone that, obviously, if they live in a certified setting, that the team, you know, knows of and considers this person to be the person, you know, actively involved family on the person's behalf.
And do you mind, just because I'll send it in the Q&A, you said it was 633.99 in the glossary?
Yeah, but I don't know the exact.
Okay. Then we don't have to put it. I just thought it would be helpful.
We can look it up, but it goes by the last, so it's involved, actively. I know it's ridiculous. Every time I think of the glossary, you have to think backwards. But I don't know, you know, there's many subsections like B, you know, there's two letters that go after that, but it would be under involved, actively.
Okay. So
we can look it up and provide that, yeah, but it is in the glossary.
Okay. We can, okay.
All right, so that's the list. What's the next slide? Okay. Decisions regarding life-sustaining treatment. There is a brain death exception in the Department of Health regulations, so that if the hospital tells us that the person meets the brain death protocol, the person is really already clinically dead, so we really don't, so there is nothing further to be done. If they tell us that the person meets the brain death protocol, and it's something about not having any brain activity in the stem, I mean, it's a medical clinical determination that would be made by the hospital, and there's nothing further to be done. So sometimes they call just to make sure, so, you know, the same brain death exception that applies to the general population applies to our individuals as well. But there are steps to be followed whenever the surrogate, so we refer to the person who has the authority to make the decision, because it doesn't have to be a guardian, it could be a family member, so that's why we use the term surrogate. So anyone on that list who's making the decision, that sort of initiates the process. And the most important thing that you need to know is that we have to have the OPWDD checklist completed. So the that must be the link must be on the slide. Did people have?
So they just have there was no attachments to the material, so they have the checklist on this slide, which is the checklist that you have.
Right. So that really is the most important thing, is that the checklist has to be completed. So, like, step one of the checklist is to identify who the appropriate surrogate is from the list. So they're supposed to check off which category the person qualifies in, and then write their name next to it. And step two is where the actual decisions would appear. Any treatment, life-sustaining treatment, that is requested to be withheld or withdrawn has to be written in here in step two. So the doctor, and there is supposed to be, Dr. documentation, and we have it on the checklist that, who the doctor spoke to, who made the decision. If the decision was made orally, which usually it is, usually the person's in the hospital, but they certainly don't have to be. But if the person's in the hospital and they're not doing well, their condition is rather grave, the family member and the doctor would have a conversation about what the treatment options are and what would be best for the individual in this situation. And so the family member would have to be the one to make the decision. We would not advocate or, our staff really shouldn't ever get out in front on these issues or propose it to the family. I mean, it really should be something that the family discusses with the doctor. Certainly sometimes they have meetings and they would involve the team, and then of course, different opinions could be expressed. But it really is something that the family would discuss with the doctor. They have to document it on the checklist that these are all the treatment decisions that the person wants withheld or withdrawn. That would be step 2. It's very important that everything be written in step 2 because that really controls what we are going to say that we're not objecting to. Step 3 is to confirm the individual's lack of capacity. And in most cases, there's no question about this, but it is a required step in the statute, and it has to be done. And the attending physician or a concurring physician or licensed psychologist in one of the 3 categories has to confirm the individual's lack of capacity. So it could be a licensed psychologist or physician who works for OPWDD or has worked for 2 years for a provider or some type of program that's operated or authorized by OPWDD. And the 3rd category is that they've been approved by the commissioner. They have to have specialized training. So in some areas of the state, we have lists of clinicians, and in some, we really don't. But what we always do is if the hospital doesn't have a clinician who meets this criteria, we would always send someone. We would send a physician or a licensed psychologist. We do our best as far as, the time constraints and when we can have someone go there. But that, it is a required step, and I know people, it can be a bit of a difficult because it has to be a physician or a licensed psychologist. Now, step 4 is where we get into the medical. So the person has to have one of 3 medical conditions, and the first is a terminal condition. I have a definition of terminal condition. Yeah, an illness or injury from which there is no recovery and which reasonably can be expected to cause death within 1 year. Again, we don't hold the person to a year, but that's the basic parameters that the doctor would put in, what the terminal condition is in step A. If they're saying there's a terminal condition, they need to fill that out. Or it could be permanent unconsciousness, or a medical condition which requires life-sustaining treatment, is irreversible, and will continue indefinitely. So if the person does not have a terminal condition, this is more like the catch-all category that the doctor would use. And in many cases, there's, a number of conditions that sort of group together meet the standard. So they can put a number of medical conditions in there under C. And regardless of which of those 3 you have, you also have to have, in paragraph 2 here, that the treatment would impose an extraordinary burden on the individual. Now, the extraordinary burden is not a defined term, and that was an intentional thing because it's supposed to be very individualized. What would be an extraordinary burden for this individual. So, and in some cases, it could be different things. Sometimes what the individual is going to have a PEG tube, and they live in a state-operated site, and we don't have another, they would have to go to a different residence where there's nursing. That could be, part of an extraordinary burden. We often see the dialysis cases because the dialysis is such a rigorous course of treatment, even under the best of circumstances. That's for someone who really doesn't understand, what the process is, and they have to travel a distance and sit still for 8 hours, like 3 times a week. It can be very, very arduous. So it's it could be anything. We don't like to, sort of suggest what might meet the standards. The doctor is really supposed to it's supposed to be individualized. That's what would be an extraordinary burden for the person. So, and then there is one additional requirement. If the surrogate is making a decision to withhold or withdraw artificial nutrition or hydration, there is an additional step that has to be completed. So they either have to say there's no reasonable hope of maintaining life, or that the artificially provided nutrition or hydration itself poses an extraordinary burden. And sometimes we see that if the person's kidneys aren't working and they're not, they can't process the artificial hydration, so that they, it causes them to be very bloated and they can't really. So that could be what we would see in that part of step 4. And then step 5 is the notification. And this all has to be done. The law says it has to be done by the attending physician. Certainly if the person's in a hospital, it's usually more a social worker or risk management person who would be sending the checklist, but the doctor does have to sign it and provide the medical documentation in support of the request. So the person is supposed to be notified, and then if the person came from an OPWDD residential facility, either state-operated or voluntary operated, the notice goes to the facility director and mental hygiene legal service. If the person did not come from an OPWDD residential facility, they came from home, they came from a nursing home, they live in their own apartment, the notice goes to the director of the DDRO. It says DDSO because that was before we had the RO-SO split, that the regulation was old. So the regulation says DDSO, but for someone who does not live in a certified residence, it should go to the regional office. So when do the notifications have to be provided? If they are going to withdraw life-sustaining treatment, they want to take the person off a ventilator, for example, they have to provide the notice at least 48 hours in advance. So they provide the notice, and the notified parties would have 48 hours to respond. If they hear back from everyone within the 48 hours, which usually we do, we try to respond that day, then you don't have to wait the full 48 hours to implement the decision. It's a little trickier with the withholding because the law says you provide the notice at the earliest possible time. So that can be, there's no set time limit for that. But again, we try to respond at MHLS. There was a lot more objections when the law first was put into effect. It's now pretty rare that we would object or that MHLS would object. And really the best thing that you can say is that, we try to involve MHLS as early as we can in the process so that they are aware of what the decisions are being made, the person's condition, that kind of thing, so that we don't run into a problem. Of course, on the weekends, it's usually a problem. On Friday, many hospitals are trying to get DNRs in place for individuals, and we do the best that we can with responding within those time frames. So there are a number of people who can object. There's 7 categories of who can object. A lot more people than received the notices that we just talked about, which was only the residential director and MHLS, if there is MHLS involvement. So the person could always object, a sibling or parent if they've had substantial and continuous contact. The doctor can object, any other doctor providing services to the individual, the director, MHLS. So there are a number of people who can object, but it's usually going to be the provider or MHLS. So the objections can be made orally or in writing. We would always submit it in writing. And the objection really suspends the decision. The idea is that you would sort of preserve the status quo until someone can go to court and try to get it resolved. And again, it's very rare that we have an objection nowadays. There is also the possibility of going through the dispute mediation at the hospital, which is like sometimes an ethics committee review, and the family member would come in and the doctor would come in and they would, but it's not binding. It's not binding mediation, so that you may end up having to go to court anyway. So sometimes that is a good option, and then, you know, the objection is withdrawn and then we avoid having to go to court. But if there, you know, if the dispute is really, you know, I don't know, we don't think it's going to be something that can be resolved, then you might as well just go to court and not take that intermediate step. Dispute resolution, so you can't have, so any of these parties can go to court. That's, you know, a difficulty with the statute is that the party that objects doesn't necessarily have to make the court application, which is how I think it should be, but it isn't how it is. But, you know, again, it's rare, and when MHLS objected, they did always make the court application. So it's not usually an issue, but, I mean, it is sort of a flaw in the statute that the person who objects doesn't necessarily have to go to court. Dispute mediation, you cannot use dispute mediation if the surrogate decision-making committee is the surrogate and has made the decision. And again, it's non-binding. You know, it's just sort of an informal way to try to resolve the objection without having to go to court. And then the law says that you could, you know, you go to court after 72 hours, but there's really no way to enforce that, or, you know, and again, it doesn't say who has to initiate the court application. So there is for formally, there are some hospitals that have religious objections. So in some instances, that has been a problem where someone has been in a Catholic hospital, let's say, and they didn't want to, or there is something also with Orthodox Jewish facilities where there are certain religious impediments to certain decisions. So they are supposed to transfer the person if you want to have the person transferred to another facility. And there is immunity for providers as well as the surrogates, as long as they're acting in good faith. So if it's a good faith determination, you know, it's not usually something that, like they could pursue litigation about. So the Family Health Care Decision Act came into law in 2010. And this is the law for the general population end-of-life decision-making. We already had our law since 2003. Our law, again, is in the Surrogates Court Procedure Act. Family Health Care Decision Act is in the Public Health Law. And it generally does not apply to individuals with IDD, but there are two exceptions. First of all, if the person is providing their own consent, we would not go to the OPWDD checklist. The person would have the same rights as anybody else in the general population to make their decision, have the doctor sign the most. There is a Department of Health checklist number 1, but it's not a checklist like ours is that has to be completed and attached. It's really just guidance for the steps that you need. But that's, so certainly if the person's making their own decision, we don't go to the OPWDD checklist. The second one is if the person has a healthcare agent. So if they have a properly executed healthcare proxy, the healthcare agent can make the decision and the mulct can be completed based on the consent of the healthcare agent. And again, we would not go to the OPWDD checklist. There are a couple of things to keep in mind about the healthcare proxy. The most significant that we run into is that there are certain witness requirements in the public health law and in the OPWDD regulations in 63320. I think it's the next slide. Yes. So special witness requirements. So if the person lives in an OPWDD residence, one of the witnesses has to be a physician or doesn't have to be a licensed psychologist in all cases. So it's a little bit tricky, but there are special witness requirements for proxies, and a lot of times we run into a problem with that, you know, the people at the agency didn't realize that the proxy doesn't meet the witness requirements. So one of the witnesses has to be a physician or a psychologist, and one of the witnesses has to not be affiliated with the residence or the agency. So those are, you know, a little bit of, you know, a problem that we run into. The second thing is that there's an exception under the healthcare proxy law for artificial nutrition and hydration. So that the healthcare agent only has the authority to make those decisions if they know what the person's wishes are. So, and the standard for that can be a lot higher. I mean, for someone to execute a proxy, we usually say they really only need to have a level of understanding that they trust this person to make very important decisions for them. Even if they don't have to make their own healthcare decisions currently, as long as they say, this is the person I want to make important decisions for me. I trust this person to do what's best. But for the artificial nutrition and hydration, they have to have specific knowledge. I mean, so that has also been a problem. So if the decision involves nutrition and hydration and it's not covered in the proxy and the agent does not have knowledge of what the person wants, you're going to have to use the checklist and go through the process that way. So that is another thing to keep in mind with the proxy. The nutrition and hydration can be a problem. And if we have to use the checklist for that, you know, we might as well just put everything on the checklist and go through that process.
The most process.
Right.
Okay. There is a question about healthcare proxy, so I just wanted to add that there's a question of, do adults with disabilities need a healthcare proxy if they don't have a 17A guardian or do not have the capacity to make their own medical decisions, or is an actively involved family member automatically acceptable as a surrogate to consent for medical treatment?
An actively involved family member is automatically acceptable.
So this process is not required.
Right. But, you know, if the person has the capacity to have a health care agent, and the other thing is they have to have someone willing to do it. So you have to make sure that the health care agent is willing to undertake that, because it is a big, you know, a big responsibility that the person. But yeah, so if they want, you know, if they have someone, I mean, the hospitals love a healthcare proxy because they're very used to that from anyone in the general population. So if someone comes in with a proxy, they like that very much. So if they have, you know, if they have the capacity to have a healthcare agent and they have someone willing to serve as their agent, they could have a proxy. But it certainly isn't necessary. Actively involved family, again, can make the decision for major medical or the end-of-life decision, although the end-of-life does have to go through the process. We need the checklist. And that would be something that you would avoid with the proxy. You don't have to do the checklist.
Okay. And as far as the requirements around the role of who is obtaining the signatures on this form, that's not necessarily dictated that a care manager may be assisting a family to do this, but it would be on the person that's actually making
to do the checklist
for the person.
Technically, the checklist is supposed to be done by the doctor and by the hospital.
But the typical process for who's bringing that information to the doctor and the hospital.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, it's a good point. I guess in my mind, I always think of the residential staff, but I suppose, but I mean, certainly for someone who lives in the community, you know, doesn't live in a certified setting,
they might need support through the process. So it's really on an individual basis with a family if they need some extra support navigating through this process.
Right, and it can be difficult if the person's in the community because the community doctor doesn't, you know, and then he has to have a concurring, so he has to have someone else sign. So, you know, it's obviously a lot easier to complete the forms if the person's in the hospital, but they don't have to be.
And there was also a question regarding healthcare proxy as far as where to access that process in those forms. I don't believe that is in this.
The healthcare proxy form is on the Department of Health.
Great. Okay.
Website. What is on our website, I think, is the Healthcare Choices booklet. It's a little bit dated, but it has summaries of, you know, the major medical treatment provisions in 63311 and the Healthcare Proxy Law and the Healthcare Decisions Act. It's a little bit dense, I guess people have said, that it's, you know, because it is sort of legal and technical. You know, it may not be as user-friendly, but there are, you know, there is the Healthcare Choices booklet on our website that may provide some guidance or some, you know, have a summary.
Great. All right.
Okay, so when the Family Healthcare Decision Act was being passed, we had to sort of decide if we were going to be, you know, fold our law into the Family Healthcare Decision Act. And at the time it was being done, it just wasn't going to happen. There were too many special protections and provisions that we have in the Healthcare Decision Act, and we had that law since 2003, and we had done a lot of work with hospitals in trying to, you know, familiarize them with the process and get them to utilize the checklist. So the Family Healthcare Decision Act has 3 carve-outs, if you will, for our individuals. So the first is if the person came from an OPWDD certified setting. So, you know, certainly anyone who lives in a residence, whether it's operated or certified by us, we would have to use the Healthcare Decision Act and the checklist. The second says if the attending physician has reason to believe that the person has a history of receiving services. Many times hospitals call me about this, so we look them up in tabs. We look them up and we see do we have the person in our system? And we would at least want to see that we had confirmed the person's eligibility. So if it's someone who's not, we have no record of, it's up to the doctor to see what they're going to do. Because the third category is that if it appears to the attending physician that the person has an intellectual or developmental disability, which usually, if they're calling us, you would think that they do have that reasonable suspicion. But again, it is more, more paperwork for the doctors and the hospital to use our checklist and to use the Healthcare Decision Act process. So if the person is not in tabs and we don't have any record, we've never done an eligibility, it's up to them, it's up to the hospital to decide which process they're going to use. And I mean, in most cases, they're probably going to use the Family Healthcare Decision Act because it's easier for them. It doesn't require all this paperwork. It doesn't require all the notifications and the involvement of MHLS, such as we have. So the Family Healthcare Decision Act revoked the prior DNR law. For many years, the legislature would not pass the Family Healthcare Decision Act, which would allow a family member to make an end-of-life decision for someone. So we only had DNR. Under the old law, we had only DNR. So the Family Healthcare Decision Act did away with that. So now DNR is treated like any other withholding of life-sustaining treatment, which is really what it should be. What we did lose, and what is frequently an issue with the DNR, is under the old DNR law, you could have two physicians say that it would be medically futile to resuscitate the person, and you could have a DNR. So it was like the physician initiated the DNR, and as long as there were two physicians that agreed, they could write a DNR. We don't have that anymore. So there's no quick way to get a DNR. It still has to go through the checklist and the process. And that has been an issue because, sometimes the physicians feel very strongly that the person should have a DNR. And, we certainly understand that, but we have to comply with the law. And so that has been an issue is, DNR is just treated like anything else. And the other issue is, as we talked about, the families sometimes want to plan and they want to have a DNR so that in the event something happens and they're no longer here to make the decision on their individual's behalf. And again, the person has to meet the criteria at the time the decision is being made. There also used to be a close friend. You could have a close friend consent to a DNR, but we don't need that anymore because we have the surrogate decision-making committee. And again, they have to meet the same criteria, and MHLS has to be notified if the person lives in an OPWDD certified setting.
So, Eileen, we've had a couple of questions come through about guardianship to clarify, and we have 10 minutes left. So I don't know if you want to take a moment to pause and look at some of those guardianship questions, and then see if we can get to the remainder of the slides about the most. Does that sound good? Okay, because you had, so we'll start from the bottom and work up on some of these, and if some are, content that you're not prepared to speak to at this time, then we can pass. So for guardianship, in instances, and this has come up a couple of times, where the guardian seems to be exercising their authority more towards their own interests than the person's, where it's, intruding on privacy and on decision-making, those types of things. Can you speak to some of that?
So there are some issues that are so personal to the individual that the guardian does not have the authority, such as sexual activity. The guardian, sometimes we even have guardians who don't want the individual to be assessed for their ability to consent to sexual activity, and the guardian really can't prevent that. And it's very, very difficult because, as we said, 17A is broad, so there are no real parameters set forth in the law. And the difficulty really is the way the guardians sometimes try to exercise their authority. And I know it's so difficult for staff to know when they can sort of push back on that. There is a lot of tension there, but I mean, what I would say is you would, try to advocate for the individual, but we don't really have like a bright line of, you know what I mean? But, this is where the guardian's authority ends. It's really something that you have to work through with that particular guardian.
So it's getting through that person-centered planning process and what's in the best interest of the person. If it has to do with not approving medications, going to counseling appointments, trying to limit socialization with certain people, things like that, that it's continuing to need to be flushed out through that person-centered planning process.
They want their...
This is a separate one of if parents have guardianship, but they want their child who lives alone to make decisions about money, doctor's appointments, other things, and only wants to be consulted for large things. This is something that has to be explicitly stated. I think this sounds kind of ideal, that it's more the guardian is making the choices for somebody that needs to be.
Well, I mean, I actually think that's better, that the guardian only wants to be consulted for, because generally, if the person has the ability to make a decision, we should honor their decision. And really, we should only look to the guardian if the person can't make a decision. But, it's not always easy to implement that. And you know what I mean? And a lot of the parents will say, I have the authority. The court gave me the authority. I am the guardian, and I make all the decisions. So, I mean, I would like to say that we should honor the person's individual decision whenever we can, and that we would only look to the guardian, for decisions that the individual can't make. But again, it depends on how, involved the parents are, and some parents want to make every decision. So I don't really have a good answer for that.
So under 17A, that is a conflict, and you had mentioned that things are kind of moving away from that, because there were some questions about supported decision-making.
Well, that's the trend. The trend is really towards supported decision-making. We don't have a supported decision-making statute in New York State yet. But yes, that is the trend. But, a lot of the parents who have 17A guardianship and have always had it and are very used to making all the decisions on their individual's behalf, it's kind of hard to try to move them slowly towards supported decision-making, or, to let the... But I would say, I mean... Unless you have a guardian who's very involved and wants to make every decision, I wouldn't go to the guardian. I would try to do what the person wants, as long as it's, reasonable.
Their capacity to make those choices.
Right. But I know it depends on the parent, and a lot of them are very involved and want to make every decision, and you have to sort of try to navigate that on a case-by-case basis.
So there's not an easy answer to that. So there's a question of who can take legal guardianship in the event that there's the death of the guardian, basically. What's that?
So it could be, sometimes in the guardianship there is a standby guardian. And there could also be an alternate standby guardian. Some families have like 3 or 4 different options. So when the guardian passes, the standby guardian can act as the guardian right away, but they have to go back to court within 6 months of the death of the guardian to apply to sort of move up to be the primary guardian. So they can act in that role, but they have to go back to court within 6 months, and a lot of them don't know that. They think they just are automatically the guardian. So if they don't have themselves confirmed within the 6 months, they would have to start all over and reapply to be a guardian.
So if that is not included in the guardianship documentation, then if that person passes away, the person no longer has a guardian.
And there would be no guardian, right.
And does having guardianship assist with the Social Security application process? I don't know if that's something you would know.
Well, I think they certainly can, yes.
6 of one, half dozen of the other. Social Security will recognize a guardian, but Social Security does not mandate that the guardian become rep payee if the guardian does not want to.
Okay, so I think that we've gone through a lot of those, that there's some more specific, because we are coming to the end of our time, and you have provided, and I'm sorry to skip ahead through these, but you have provided some contact information here as far as if there are some questions, but if people have more detailed questions about navigating some of these conflicts and things about the process, would you recommend that they're going through their own agency's counsel to navigate through that legality and those questions? Yes. Okay, so this contact information is not a catch-all for any guardianship question, that you should really be working with your agency's counsels with their expertise in this process, and definitely with sitting down to navigate some of these challenging, personal rights conflicts that can come up sometimes with an over-involved guardian. Okay, great. So I apologize for skipping through the end of these, but this content is available through the e-advisory and the materials that were shared, so I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add.
The one thing, yes, that is very important is under the Family Health Care Decision Act, a nurse practitioner can sign the MALST and can act as the attending physician, not under our Healthcare Decision Act. Under our Healthcare Decision Act, it has to be a doctor. I mean, we did have that language added to the MALST when it was revised last year. But that is something that, that we run into, that the nurse practitioner can do it, and we're trying to have the nurse practitioner do it under our law, but we have to go back to the legislature with that this year. So for now, it must be a physician.
Okay, great. Great, so this information is included, and we'll review any additional questions to see if there's anything to add for our hot topics in the next conference to speak to some of the things that maybe weren't addressed. So excellent. So thank you everyone for your time and attention today and attendance today at the conference. The next one will be March 11th in 2020. So Happy New Year, everyone. We hope you have a great holiday season, and thank you again for your time today. The recording of today's conference will be available on the website in a week or so. Have a great day.